Hi everyone, thanks for joining with us. My name is Doug Grant, General Manager of the American Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to this latest presentation in the Amcham Diversity and Inclusion series. The Amcham Diversity and Inclusion Committee is proud to present this recorded webinar series, The Difference, where committee members and guests are in dialogue to make a difference, to spark change in you, the audience, to work towards more diverse, equitable and inclusive workplaces. In today's webinar, committee member Maruk Mondal from Fragaman will interview Prue Gilbert, CEO and founder of Grace Papers, as well as Katie Wyatt, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at Coles, on accelerating gender equality post-pandemic. Don't forget to share, comment, and tag using the Amcham Difference. Thank you, Maruk. Over to you.
Thank you, Doug. Before we commence, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the past, present, and future traditional custodians and elders of this nation, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual, and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. It is my great pleasure to moderate this event and on behalf of Amcham's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and to speak with two individuals who are more greatly involved in the D&I space, working with corporates and in their own businesses to promote and implement D&I initiatives. I shall provide introductions shortly. In terms of diversity, I myself tick so many boxes: a foreign name, an Indian ethnic background, and now a mature aged woman. But I have been fortunate to have worked at Fragaman for 2 decades. Fragaman is the world's leading immigration services firm, a firm that is recognized for our leadership in gender equality and diversity. We know that gender equality brings with it many benefits, and yet the fact that we are discussing this today is evidence that much is yet to be achieved in this space. Probably those listening to this webinar have heard it all before, but it is up to us to pursue this message and help in delivering this equality for the greater good, and through and post this pandemic period, empower all businesses, big and small, to work towards diversity and inclusion. Much is written and said on this topic, but it will be interesting to hear from Prue and Katie, who have had the experience in championing, leading, and lobbying for gender equality from their unique, inclusive perspective of connecting with both men and women. We are interested in exploring what they have seen from their clients, business leaders, what has worked, what hasn't, and what we still want allies and advocates to do, especially given the impact of the pandemic that impacted on all of us in different ways. And while there is optimism, at least in Australia for this year, with unemployment falling to 6.4%, underemployment decreasing, and hours of work increasing, underemployment of women is at a 7-year low, with increase in part-time and casualization of work. McKinsey in a report talks about the pandemic having a regressive effect on gender equality and states that women's jobs are 1.8 times more vulnerable to the COVID crisis and accounts for 54% of the overall job losses. Gender equality, even pre-pandemic, was an issue, and the pandemic has certainly put a spanner in the works, given that women tend to work in sectors which have been heavily disadvantaged during the pandemic. With the closure of schools and childcare, women had to once again take on a bulk of the family and caring responsibilities. But I admit we have already been hearing this through the last year. So let's speak with our guests and gain their insights. It is my great pleasure to have the opportunity to interact with Prue Gilbert, CEO and founder of Grace Papers, who runs award-winning programs and services that drive workplace gender equality. Prue is a lawyer, a human rights advocate, and a mother. She has been called the anti-discrimination guru and a game changer, and her business has also won the Australian Human Rights Business Award. It's also great to have Katie Wyatt, National D&I Manager at Coles Group, Who hasn't heard of CAUSE? Who leads the diversity and inclusion mission at CAUSE and their Better Together inclusion strategy. CAUSE has won recognition and is leading by example. And with the backing of its board, has committed to a number of D&I initiatives to be achieved by 2023. Katie has a strong personal connection to and passion for the impact that inclusion initiatives can create in our workplaces. And with 2023 not being too far, is going to be very busy indeed. So let's get on to some questions and some conversation with these two great ladies in the D&I space. So Katie, tell us a little about Katie Wyatt, your background, your family and role. What motivated you to take on the role of diversity and inclusion in one of Australia's biggest and most diverse organizations? Katie.
Thank you. Thanks, Maruk, for that fabulous introduction. It's always an interesting one when you're asked, who are you? I think I would qualify myself by saying, look, I'm a mum of 3 boys, and I had my boys thanks to the help of 2 amazing surrogates. I'm also a proud Yamaji Noongar woman who grew up in Perth, Western Australia, where I am currently at the moment, and also the daughter of a stolen child. I've also lived with a chronic illness since 2006. So I suppose similarly to you when you talked in your introduction about sort of ticking some boxes that give you a real lived experience, I've also had lived experiences of diversity and also being in the minority. And I think it gives us that empathy and insight for what we're trying to impact in the D&I space. Because I don't think, any of us want someone to just luck out because they work with one great company. We want inclusion to be a human right that is afforded in every workplace and every community. So that probably gives you a little bit of an insight into what motivated me to take on this role. But I've always had a very purpose-driven career path, beginning in professional services and corporate, and then government, not-for-profit. And probably one of my favourite jobs of all time was working in the social enterprise sector. So working with really grassroots organisations who are trying to build businesses where their social impact is baked into the business model. And then I was, a year ago, given the opportunity to join Coles in this role, and feel really privileged to hold the role, because I think, we would all agree if you can have an impact in a workforce of over 120,000, then you're having a real impact. And that's what sort of drives me every single day.
Fantastic. What a great background. Really, really interesting. Thank you so much for that. Prue, I'll ask you the same question. Tell us a bit about yourself, Prue Gilbert, and what motivated you to start Grace Papers?
It is a funny question, isn't it, talking about yourself? A little bit of a privilege to talk about myself, really. And, I guess in this context, acknowledging my own privilege. I am a female, a mother, a partner. We've got 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. And I too started my career in professional services, and through various experiences found my way into the corporate world, and ultimately to starting Grace Papers. And Grace Papers is very much an employee experience platform empowering parents and carers, people leaders and culture. And for me, I've always wanted to create opportunities for others. I'm a long-time human rights advocate, and I really fundamentally believe that there's a better way to work and live and care. So around 7 years ago, I took a leap off my own professional cliff in many ways and transformed the small consultancy that we had into the platform that we've created today. And it was really, it was not by chance. It was a very purposeful decision. We kept talking to in particular women who had spent their entire lives building careers and, you know, had so much momentum. And then there was this one moment when they'd step away from their careers to, you know, welcome a child into the world. And this disruption impacted their career trajectory, their earnings potential, you know, and overlay that with other forms of diversity. And many of them were experiencing a double jeopardy in relation to that experience as well. So I knew it was a problem that I guess I had a background in from an expertise perspective to be able to really make a difference in. Obviously a passion to actually drive it. And most importantly, I had a partner, my husband, Ben, who was really willing to not just back me, but back the mission, because he could see too that this wasn't just about women. This was about families. This was about people. This was about humans. It was, you know, it was much about men and workplaces as it was a women's issue. And so I guess over, you know, the past sort of 6 or 7 years, the team's really grown. We've got a team of lawyers, HR professionals, psychologists, coaches, many of whom are working parents and have built and grow, you know, the business that we work in. So really focused on managing and retaining and promoting talent to create more equal outcomes.
No, thank you very much for that. I mean, I can totally identify with the days when there was no flexibility. And therefore, I am a big supporter of it today. And we can talk forever on that, but I'll move on. So 2020 and 2021 continue to challenge us to keep flexing our resilience muscles. As parents, D&I practitioners, with significant roles and no doubt wearing many other hats. What's working for you? And it will be interesting for our audience to hear the examples. And what are you up against? What rituals have you put in place to manage your own well-being and resilience throughout the pandemic? We'll go with Prue first.
Okay. Yeah, look, I'll be honest, I did find 2020, you know, a pretty challenging year. I love Brene Brown's terminology. She talks about it being a difficult season, you know, a difficult season for relationships, for parenting, for balance, and especially, I think, for prioritizing self-care. And I think if I reflect on that first lockdown, I'm in Victoria, so everybody knows what happened in Victoria. You know, there was almost a bit of an adrenaline rush. We rallied together, as you kind of do in a crisis, and it really did feel like we were all in it together. We had a family vision for how we were going to manage through it. We had different rituals and practices, and I think, you know, both as a team but also as a family. And there was I guess a different sense of achievement when we actually got through it and, you know, got the kids back to school. And look, I'm not denying I wouldn't ever wish homeschooling upon anybody who didn't want to be homeschooling their children, you know, after that first experience. But I think it was really the second lockdown that challenged me. And I remember in that first 2 weeks, you know, there were a couple of days when the tears just kept on rolling and I felt, you know, really vulnerable. And I actually felt like I was failing everywhere, quite miserably, especially as a parent. You know, our youngest was 6. So, you know, just learning to read and write and all of those things, and really required far more education and teaching than I could possibly give him. I had a team of about 12 that I was managing, and, you know, the realization that, I guess, you know, and I remember reflecting with one of our team who is a coach, and she was in Sydney at the time, so she had a little bit more bandwidth and capacity to support me through that. And we actually unpacked, you know, what was going on. And for me, very much it was a conflict of values, of 2 of my priority values, you know, education of my children, which we fundamentally believe to be a human right, but also the right to work and the need to work, you know, and generate an income. And so that conflict I found really, really challenging. But at least I think the first step was acknowledging that conflict that existed. And then there was another trigger moment when I received an email from a meditation organisation that I have historically practiced regularly. And last year I just hadn't been practicing meditation. And it prompted me to remember that I do actually have a toolkit of a whole lot of different tools and resources that I've been building over many, many years, you know, from yoga practices to meditation to exercise, in particular for me. And so I reintroduced, you know, those rituals and just made them non-negotiables as part of the routine at home. And I found myself, I had to change it. I had to get up at 5:15 to manage it so that we could fit in the homeschooling. I'd do my meditation. I'd spend an hour or an hour and a half working, and then I'd go for a walk. As the kids were getting up, I'd go for a walk with my neighbour. And that actually really set me up for success. So I really did put my own oxygen mask on first. And at the same time, we introduced a gratitude practice for our team so that every morning we actually start with a gratitude. You know, what are you grateful for? And, you know, we've had new members join the team over the past year and everybody working remotely. And we've found it to be a really incredible way of connecting, getting to know each other, and creating a space where people can be vulnerable, where we can also reach out to them afterwards through that journey. So they're probably some of the reflections and strategies I used. There was no perfection in any of it. And I hope never to homeschool again. But yeah, that was probably it for me.
I'm sure the kids got a whole lot more with Mum as teacher. It was the one role I didn't have to play, and I was grateful for that. But kudos to those of you who had to add that to your workday. So thank you very much for that. And Katie, briefly, if you'd like to share how, you know, you've managed your own well-being and resilience.
Yeah, sure. I love that term, difficult season, Prue. I think that's definitely something I'm going to take with me, because I think we're all going, oh, that was 2020, wasn't it? Now we're like, oh, it's still going. So the season is a good word. Look, I'm very conscious of the privilege I've had throughout the pandemic. I have a husband who has, you know, it really fairly shares the load, although I would never admit that to him, because there's always room for improvement. But I also was lucky enough to have found myself working in an organisation and an industry that was, you know, we grew in that time. We didn't contract like so many. And my husband, fortunately, his role similarly kind of, you know, remained consistent, although we both did start working from home, and we were in Victoria all of 2020, so definitely feel your pain, Prue. I think one of the reflections I had was because I've been through, like, I've had cancer twice in probably the last 15 years, and when you're having chemo, you do spend a lot of time at home and you don't really see anyone, and life becomes very closed in a lot of ways and open in others. And so I think I was like, I've totally got this because I've done this before. So I actually found the Melbourne both lockdowns okay, because I could see a light at the end of the tunnel. What I think I found harder is 2021, and when Perth went into lockdown in late Jan, early Feb, I actually found that 5 days the hardest of all of the time. And I think it was because I, you know, didn't expect it. Also, I think we all subconsciously, if not rationally, thought we turned a corner and things will be different now. And it's made me kind of go, the light at the end of the tunnel is not that clear. And that's when it becomes quite hard to think, how do we just find sort of that comfort? But, you know, I did relocate to WA very deliberately because of the experience of living through Melbourne and feeling so isolated from our families who are in WA. And all I can say is I've been really lucky that I've been able to make those decisions and take those actions. And I've had childcare for my youngest throughout. I've done a really terrible job of homeschooling, but he's in school this year and he doesn't seem to be too far behind, so fingers crossed. But yeah, that's probably, I don't know if I've shared anything helpful at all, Maruk, but
no, it's we can relate to the experiences, isn't it? And I think, you know, it's made us more resilient. And hey, who knew we'd have to face this, but we did. And who knows what this year is going to bring us, though. Fingers crossed. So, you know, typical three women getting very chatty, but we're going to lose sight on time. So let's roll on. Katie, Coles no doubt has had to navigate through more than its fair share of challenges, which has required it to be more resilient as an organization, as a culture, and most importantly, as individuals, as you just said. Tell us a bit about what the organization has been through over the last 20 months. You've had to reinvent yourselves in many ways. I remember those rush and big queues outside supermarkets. My goodness, what madness was that? But over to you, if you could tell us a bit about how Coles managed it.
Yeah, sure. And look, it has, I think resilience, it's come up a couple of times, has definitely been a really guiding word for Coles in 2020. Obviously, the majority of our team have not been able to work from home. They've been absolutely on the front line throughout the pandemic. I think, fortunately, we were quite well positioned to prioritise team member wellbeing when this happened, because we've already been on a journey of raising awareness and building capacity in the area of mental health, and it's a really key part of our safety and wellbeing strategy. So we have a program called Mind Your Health, which is based on those pillars, or based on pillars of I'm seen, I'm heard, and I matter. And so the team were already planning things, and then when COVID hit, they basically just accelerated the things they were doing. So we ran challenges, like 30-day challenges around gratitude, empathy and mindfulness. We ran more physical-based challenges to get people moving and kind of feeling the benefits of that exercise. And we sent journals to every team member multiple times as each of those challenges began. And it became a real connection point for teams in a store to talk about every day how their challenge was going, but also to share across on our social channels internally about what we're doing. And so I do think that that was just, it was perfectly timed and we were perfectly primed for that. And I'm really proud that mental health was, you know, the main story for Coles internally from the very beginning, because I think we all realised quite quickly that that was going to be the silent victim, I suppose, of the pandemic.
Thank you. Clearly, the work you've put in pre-pandemic has come to good use for Coles during the pandemic, and more businesses can plan accordingly as well. So, Katie, sorry, I'm going to let you talk a bit again. World Economic Forum estimates that it will take almost 250 years for us to achieve gender equality if we don't accelerate our actions towards it. Yet many workplaces find it difficult to shift gender equality from being an HR or a D&I issue to a business issue. How have you positioned it at Coles? How do you use your position to influence that change at Coles?
Yeah, it's such a depressing statistic and forecast, isn't it? Oh, but it's not, you know, hopefully it can marshal us for action and not make us just all hide under our donors. But look, I think there's some things Coles have done really well, whilst acknowledging that we've still got a lot of work to do. Some of the things we've done well is we've set quite clear and public targets around what we'll achieve in the gender equality space. And the more I reflect on those targets, the more I realise that actually it's quite unique for companies to be as specific about what they plan to achieve in an external way. So I think that has really helped, because we're a very metric-driven organisation. We like a target. We like to know what we're aiming for. So that really does marshal action. The other thing we did when we launched the Better Together strategy was we implanted that ownership in the business from day one. So we have steering committees that lead each pillar, and they are led by business ELT or executive leadership team members. And so whilst the responsibility and accountability for D&I, yes, it sits within the Chief People Officer's realm, because that's where structurally D&I is placed, which is, that's a decision, and not every organisation will go in that direction, but for us it's the right one. But I work with senior leaders across the business, and I need them to sign up to things. I need them to fund things. I don't have a huge budget or a huge team. So, to your point about how you use your position to influence change, I think in the D&I space, that's all you have, is your ability to influence, because you don't have big teams and budgets. So what you need to do is influence without authority. And so I think a lot of that is about the mindset that you bring. And, that 250-year number, I think I've heard UN Women Australia talk about it in terms of it's about taking action every single day. So what is something you can do every single day to drive action forward? And if you impact a small group, that will have a multiplier effect. So keeping that mindset, and also just relationships, because that's ultimately how you get things done.
Yeah. There's, we've seen there's been lots of lip service to this, over the years. So you really need that commitment. And if you have the top tier committed to it, then you've already won there. And people like you have to push them towards that. Prue, in many ways, last year propelled us forward from a gender equality perspective, as we finally removed the concept of using flexibility to enable the juggle, away from being solely a woman's issue. What do you see as the biggest hurdles to gender equality, and how can we take some of the silver linings from last year to propel us forward?
It's a great question. I agree with you, Katie. It is somewhat depressing that that statistic around how long it's going to take us to get to gender equality without an acceleration. And certainly flexibility, in particular for knowledge workers, I think really did shift last year. And, one of the real opportunities that we saw was for men to be more active in caregiving. And certainly I'm still seeing it at the school gates in the mornings and the afternoons, that there are still many more men doing the drop-offs and the pickups. Well, actually, I haven't seen it this week, if the truth be known, because my partner's done them all. So, but it's the same with the after-school activities and so forth. It feels like it is a much more shared responsibility that, so we have shifted the dial on that. But we know there's a lot of work to do. And I think the other, the two things that really are in my mind, and certainly from an evidence perspective, we need to continue to focus on, firstly, sexual harassment in the workplace, and the accountability that we need to put in place to mitigate against that. And secondly, it is, again, the shifting the burden of unpaid care from being a women's issue, because it does impact everything from pay equity to career progression to equal opportunities for decision making at the top echelons of every institution and organisation, whether they be political or private, commercial or not-for-profit. We need to have equal representation, where all the most important decisions are made. Positively, we did see progress on both of those fronts, I believe, last year. On the and workplaces really did play quite a significant role. We have had a number of clients hit 50-50 women and men taking parental leave at particular moments over the past 2 years. So we've really seen not just the introduction of equal access to paid parental leave within workplaces, but also the fostering of cultures that support people to actually access that. We hope that will continue, but it is going to require an reauthorization of cultures, particularly in this new world of flexibility, with different forms of flexibility. And, anecdotally, we are hearing, well, I'm already at home, so I don't need to take parental leave. Some of those sorts of comments starting to play out. Yet the evidence is really clear that when men actually take on the sole responsibility for caregiving, they are more likely to play a significant role in their children's lives forever. So parental leave remains as critical as ever. And I think the other one is, in the sexual harassment place, and I do commend, one of our clients, Landra and Rogers, for really shifting the dial and stepping up in changing their policy last year with regards to sexual harassment. For those of you who've read or seen or observed the Respect at Work report that was released last year by Kate Jenkins, Sex Discrimination Commissioner, it revealed that 40% of all those who experienced sexual harassment in the workplace had also had a bystander present. And what Landra and Rogers have done is introduced effectively a no bystander rule. So there is no room for bystanders within that organisation when it comes to sexual harassment. And they changed one word in their policy to affect that change, and it was from should report to must report. So if you are an employee within that organisation and you observe, experience, or become aware of sexual harassment, you must report it. So they've effectively, made it a zero tolerance issue. So I think, it's topical. The sexual harassment piece, I think every time it plays out, it shows just how little accountability there often is from a leadership perspective for sexual harassment. And I think the voices of lived experience need to play a role in formulating policies to change that. And I think it's awesome that Landra and Rogers have actually set such a high bar in, taking that first step around bystanders. There's obviously a way to go, a long way to go. But yeah, they're the two areas that I think we really need to focus on.
Thank you very much for that, Prue. We've got about 15 minutes, but I've still got lots of questions, so let's go through it. So, leading on from what you were just saying, we talk about redress and empowering women. What does it mean to each of you to empower women? And what more can we do to prevent the gender inequality? Let's go with Katie first.
Thanks, Maruk. So for me, empowerment is really a key part of how we build inclusive workplaces. So we need to create a workplace where anyone, particularly those marginalised groups, feel psychologically safe, then that they're valued, they belong, then they will feel that empowerment to fulfil their potential. And this is not just the right moral thing to do, it's also the key to competitive difference, because it enables us to unlock the power of cognitive diversity. And so in terms of what more can we do to prevent inequality, I think, we just can't let up. We have to keep that goal in mind, and it's not something that will ever finish. It's something that we have to work at every single day. Like I've said, and that just probably keeps us level So to progress, we have to do more. And so that, I think, takes work, that takes commitment from workplaces to, similar to the example you've just shared, Prue, to actually get underneath what's causing different challenges or barriers and then to solve for those. But, all of our brains and our systems and our institutions are often working against equality, even if not deliberately. So I think we need a systemic approach to solving for it.
Prue?
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Katie. We definitely need a systemic approach. I mean, and I think one of the key ways we do that is actually by educating people as to what empowerment actually means. What we often find is people don't actually understand or have a deep understanding of their own agency. Will they thrive? What are their rights and responsibilities? What is their vision for their career? And from a systemic perspective, we need to actually ensure that people do understand empowerment, so they know how to find their voice, but they also know how to build their village around them, to actually navigate the complexities of workplaces. They are complex places, organisations and systems now, and we find that is particularly the case when people are going through parental leave, for example. Any transitional phases it can be really disruptive. So I would definitely say that, agency is critical and education around that. On the prevention front, again, we know that people revert. Well, I'll go back a step. We really need to make sure that we're relying on evidence based, and that we continue to build the evidence base of what prevents gender inequality. And it's certainly a piece that we are really committed to and have done an extensive piece of work with the Victorian government, where we actually explored that in the context of parental leave. We know that in Australia there are some indicators as to why gender inequality happens at that particular time when you welcome your first baby. And yes, there's paid parental leave policies around that, but there's also in Australia an average age gap within heterosexual couples. And that age gap is around 3 or 4 years. So you're also navigating a domestic pay gap at home. If you take that 3 to 4 years of experience, then, inevitably the male partner is earning more than the female partner. So the reversion to those traditional gendered stereotypes is often unconscious. We assume these roles because of the financial decision that, that just has to be the way that it is. So I think we also need to focus on how we disrupt those reversions to those gendered stereotypes that, 10 years down the track can be really hard to redress. It's very hard to flip that model for families who have become reliant upon it and set their whole family structure up around it. But we can actually educate, inform and disrupt in a preventative way. And that's exactly what the piece of work we've done with Victorian government has actually proven. And in fact, with that intersectional lens as well, the findings were that the work that we've done and, that focus on empowerment actually produces higher gains for culturally diverse people identifying as LGBTQ, because the more you have to gain when you apply an empowerment model, you will actually gain. So I think, a really clear focus on evidence-based strategies and outcomes and investing in them, and then rolling that out and staying the course with them. I think sometimes, or often organisations will get to the stage where they go, oh, we don't seem to have this problem anymore. Take a step back and reflect on why you've addressed that problem. Is that because the strategies you've put in place focused on prevention, and if so, don't touch them. Whereas often we go, oh, well, we fixed that, let's, you know, take the money from here and put it into here. So you know, I think that holistic view of the system, as Katie was saying, is really critically important too.
Also, you know, we get changes of guard at organizations, and then, you know, the culture is always determined by the person on the top, and I sincerely believe that. So, you know, keeping that as an ongoing mission is something that all businesses need to go for. So we've got 2 more questions, and I've got 10 minutes. So let's, but I don't want to leave out any of them. Katie, Coles showed incredible leadership last year as they applied a corporate responsibility approach to community and safety across the country. Tell us about the impact Coles has had and you have had on community empowerment.
Yeah, thank you. Look, you know, it's so amazing to look back a year ago now, and I can remember, you know, the toilet paper panic buying had started, and one of the Victorian newspapers, who shall remain nameless, I remember published an article saying everyone should just calm down but shop for like 2 weeks of groceries at the start of the lockdown. And it just, you know, as you can imagine, caused an absolute frenzy. And I can remember we described it as we had about 50 Christmases last year, because, you know, Christmas is our peak trading moment in time, and we sort of outdid Christmas time and time again around those lockdowns. So for us, and it was very clear that the priorities were to protect our team members and the safety of our team members and our customers, to make sure that, you know, we had a really important role to provide Australians with access to essential goods and services, and also, to your point, to support communities and people in need during that time. So there's so many things I think that we did both behind the scenes and in front of. So part of that was working with the government and, you know, removing some of those traditional rules around competitive behaviour so that we could actually work as an industry to meet those priorities, and not just as a company on our own. And, you know, I think that in itself is, you know, really impressive. And then the other things we did, so, you know, people would know that we brought in purchase limits to ensure that everyone had access to items. So we started Community Hour, and, you know, one of my proudest moments was one of our disability partners rang me on the day that Community Hour launched, because it was a little bit crazy across the state because of just it was new, and, you know, no one really knew how it was going to work. And one of our partners rang me so that they could put one of their employees on the phone to tell me about her experience as somebody who's blind, who went in to shop, and she'd tried a number of stores and then ended up at Coles. And the amount of support and real confidence in the team in approaching her and helping her, you know, that doesn't happen by accident. It happens because we've been putting those training pieces in place for a good 2 years prior. So very proud of that. You know, and we already work with a lot of community organisations like the Second Bite, like Food Bank, and they are the way that we have impact. So we really amped up how we worked with them during this time. You know, we worked with Indigenous organisations. I can remember, you know, we sent 80 pallets of food, which is about 50 tonnes, into remote parts of the Northern Territory, because you'll probably remember when lockdown happened, people couldn't get out or in, and either could food. And so, you know, they're the sorts of things that we didn't do them on our own. We did them through the relationships we already had with organisations who know how to provide that support on the ground. And then we used all the strengths that we could bring to help make those things happen. So I think they're the sort of moments when you realise the power of community engagement and relationships for a company. and that corporate social responsibility piece you mentioned. And we also recruited thousands of team members, and I was really pleased. You know, we worked with a number of the large employers who were forced to stand down people and employed a lot of them. And, you know, I know that happened across the industry. It wasn't unique to Coles. And I think that's probably the best parts of how we've seen the community come together during COVID. And I certainly hope that we never sort of forget that.
No, that's certainly been very impressive. I certainly have experienced it and seen it as myself. Let's move the conversation a little bit, and I'll go to Prue. A Lean-In report out of the US reveals around 59% of Black women have never had an informal interaction with a senior leader. And they self-reported that just 1 in 3 managers had checked in on them as to their well-being. Awful. We know women of color in Australia experience many of the same challenges. How can we ensure our gender equality strategies are inclusive of all women?
I feel it's an excellent question and a damning insight, really, on culture and on those of us with privilege, really. And I don't feel qualified to respond in some ways. And I suspect both of you may have additional responses, which I am really interested to hear. But to kick us off, I guess there are 2 things that I think we should always focus on when addressing this. And the first would be listening to the lived experience of those people who have that lived experience, so people of colour, women of colour, and understanding their experiences. Certainly in my time coaching, and I have been a coach for many, many years, and I can hear the impact on promotion cycles on women of colour, because they might not be as confident, or that it might not speak up as much, or and there's a lot of stereotyping that goes on in relation to that. So I think listening to the lived experience and giving those people voice around promotion cycles, policy, and understanding the discrimination that they've experienced. But I think the second thing that I would advocate for very strongly is leadership training around sponsorship. There is a difference between mentoring and sponsoring somebody, and we know that generally men are significantly more likely to get a sponsor, be sponsored by a man, and they tend to choose somebody who looks and reminds them of themselves coming through those years. They want to back them when they see themselves in them. We need to educate leaders of what sponsorship actually is, how it plays out, and create expectations and accountability for sponsoring talent. They also need to be able to have more objective views around what talent looks like. And that ties straight back into the business case for equality. The greater the difference in voices that you have in decision making, in servicing your clients, the better the organisation will perform, and the less disadvantage we will live with. So there's a justice issue, but there's also a commercial issue in relation to it. So lived experience and sponsorship would be my 2 ways of starting.
I really think as a social commitment, we should all be committed to providing that opportunity as well. Not everyone will tick all the boxes, but if we can make an impact, then that would be good for the world.
I think even just small things that we can do. I regularly now, if I'm invited to sit on a panel or have a conversation in a forum, I will ask if there's a person of colour on that forum. At times I have had to insist and actually say, well, I won't be on it unless you can find somebody. And that, changes the conversation. It changes the conversation for good. It's much better to have different voices who can come at these topics with different experiences and different views around how we achieve equality as well.
Yeah. So Prue, again, we will move back to gender equality. And you and your husband started Grace Papers, husband Ben. How does workplace gender equality impact men? How do we engage men on gender equality? And what's your vision for the future in that regard, in regard to gender equality, both men and women?
I think one of the mistakes that we often make is that we align or associate gender with women. And gender is about all genders, men included, especially, to be honest. I think that dismantling the harmful gendered stereotypes for men is what gender equality is very much about. They're damaging to men's mental health. They place enormous stresses and pressures on men. For example, to be the primary breadwinner. We know the number one concern of new fathers is actually job security, because there is so much pressure on them. And we create expectations of them to be somebody who they may potentially not be. We know that, as they say, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. But in this case, what's good for women is good for culture. And that means for men and people identifying as other, otherwise as well. So I think we need, workplace policies that do incentivise men to be more involved in taking on caring responsibilities, whether that be caring for themselves, for their families, or for their communities. We need to shift to a broader mindset around what care is and start to hold people accountable for that. We need to focus on healthy masculinity, not just the negatives, I guess, that come with outdated concepts of gender equality as well. And we need people to see that it's about everybody, and that there are benefits for all of us. If I could reflect very quickly, I certainly wouldn't be here, and I don't know that my husband would have the relationship that he has with each of our children as well, if he hadn't taken on the role, as he likes to call it, as chief parenting officer, when our children were sort of 4, 2 and just 6 months. It was a transition for our family to figure that out, because we had fallen into the gendered roles because of the age gap between us. And we did decide to flip that and reverse it. And he did take 3 months off. And it's been incredibly fulfilling for both of us, but it's also enabled me to continue to accelerate my career. And his career hasn't skipped a beat either.
Well, I think I'll host the next panel with a group of men who can talk about their experiences in encouraging gender equality. So my last question to you, Katie, what is your vision for gender equality going forward?
Yeah, look, I think, everything you've just said, Prue, really resonates with me. And I think you've both said it, gender equality is not a women's issue, it's a business issue, it's a social issue. And we have to think about it through that lens and I think there's a lot of overcorrection that needs to be done, because we're living with what we've inherited. But we also have to be really conscious of the impact that has. I've got 3 sons, and I was 2 of them are twins who have just started school for the first year. And I was reflecting on, I got spoken to by the teacher in about week 2, because they have an expectation that the children would all sit quietly on a mat for an hour and a half while the teachers spoke to them. And my two boys just would not do it. And it made me think, isn't that funny? Like, there's a lot of, I think if we look at that through gender, girls are a lot better at that age at sitting and listening, and it goes against everything in a boy's nature. And I think, gosh, what are we telling our boys in the school system about, what's natural to them is not right? And, it's almost we're planting the seeds of unhealthy masculinity, if anything. And so I think, it comes, that whole vision piece, I think, and it comes back to the view on systems and institutions, is we all have to be taking action in the workplace, in our schools, in every other institution, and moving together. And I think my parting thought would be, I think we all love the idea of gender equality and we all get it rationally, but I think we have to help everyone fall in love with the work that is required to achieve gender equality, because it won't be easy, but it's the value and the benefit at the other end is so worth it.
No, thank you very much. I can say we've come a long way, but there's still a longer way to go. Before they cut off our session, unless Prue, you had any last thoughts?
I have many, but I'm conscious of time, so I will.
This really has been such an interesting discussion. I'm not from an HR background or a D&I professional, but I'm passionate about the topic. And so it's been a great opportunity to speak to both of you. Thank you for sharing your views and experiences so generously. And I do hope the people who listen to this can take something away, but more importantly, share it more broadly. We don't want to speak to the converted, we want to spread the word. So I thank you once again for all your time in preparation and all our conversations, but I've thoroughly enjoyed this session. So thank you both.
Thanks, Maruk, for inviting us.